Good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here with another edition of Midnight Rider on the opposite side of the clock here today. Again, doing the morning show. Going to do another recap here of now day 3 of impeachment proceedings. Yesterday, we got to watch the House managers wrap up their show of evidence. Of course, I'm using air quotes behind the scenes. So we're going to get into that here and a little bit more here just before today's proceedings kick off, where we finally get to see Mr. Castor, Mr. Schoen, Mr. Vander Veen and company for Trump's defense take center stage and see what happens there. So we'll see you back here on the other side. Warning. These social media platforms are hazardous to your health. Censorship. Bills. Today by Breaking Spectre. Alright, welcome back everybody. Like I said, appreciate you tuning in. Thank you for joining on the YouTube side. We got YouTube up, Twitch up, D-Live up, and of course, if you're joining from Tiger Network, good to see you guys over there as well. Alright, so let's just get into it here this morning. Do a little bit of a recap of what transpired yesterday. Again, the 16 hours that was afforded the if you want to call it the prosecution side, the Dems bringing the so-called charges, the sole charge of an article of impeachment, wrapped up their case yesterday, and of course they provided as much quote-unquote evidence, if that's what you want to call it. But anyway, they wrapped it up yesterday. So starting off, the Blaze had this as Watch Live, Day 3 of President Trump's second impeachment trial. Democratic managers set to wrap up their case. Senate is scheduled to begin Day 3 of the impeachment trial of former President Trump at noon, and this being yesterday. Obviously, you could watch proceedings there. The managers spent 8 hours on Wednesday sharing footage of the riot, along with clips of the former president's speeches in the weeks and months leading up to the events, in which he repeatedly called into question the validity of the 2020 election and urged his supporters not to let the Democrats steal a victory. And so that was kind of the premise of that article. Some of the managers' startling video footage was new, including one clip that revealed how close rioters got to Senator Mitt Romney and how a Capitol police officer saved him. Another piece of video showed Vice President Mike Pence and senators narrowly missing the violent mob as they're being escorted to safety by security personnel. The House managers are expected to use the rest of their allotted 16 hours Thursday. I think they wrapped up a little bit early yesterday, if I recall, maybe about mid-afternoon. Didn't carry on as late as they did the day previous. Trump's lawyers will then have 16 hours to make their defense and will likely begin their presentation on Friday, which will start immediately at the top of the hour here next after this broadcast. The defense team has repeatedly claimed that the entire process of trying a former president is unconstitutional, but the Senate has twice shot down efforts to stop the trial on constitutional grounds. And after both sides have used their time, the Senate will likely then have a few hours for senators to ask questions. And there has been no final decision on whether witnesses will be called for the trial. So we'll have to see how this fares. Again, today is the rebuttal, as it were, by Trump's defense, and we'll see how that fares. Not to be outdone, One American News had this as impeachment managers deliver scathing attacks on President Trump despite history of Dem hypocrisies. Say it ain't so. Hello, Mr. Castro. And it says when he penned Federalist Paper 65 in 1788, Alexander Hamilton outlined a fear that is currently playing out on every news network in America. Namely, when it comes to impeaching a president, those tasked with the proceedings, quote, can hardly be expected to possess the requisite neutrality towards those whose conduct may be the subject of scrutiny, end quote. It was the congressman from Texas' 20th District, Joaquin Castro, that presented the House manager's main argument that the president allegedly did nothing while the siege dragged on. And of course, you've heard them talk about fight like hell, the main words in that being used, right? Fight like hell, as if that is something bad that now is insightful. But I think we're going to see some cut-ups here where we've seen our Democratic friends use that on a multitude of occasions. So, what is good for the goose must also be good for the gander. Donald Trump did not send help to those officers who were badly outnumbered, overwhelmed, and being beaten down, Castro claimed. 2 hours into the insurrection, by 3 p.m., President Trump had not deployed the National Guard. When the president did send in the National Guard to end a protest in Lafayette Park over the summer, however, Castro sang a far different tune. On June 4th, the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, he tweeted stating, "We must oppose the use of military force to crush peaceful protesters, and the right to free speech is universal." There's his tweet from June 4th of last year. Meanwhile, California's 15th District Rep. Eric Swalwell took a moment to share his story. Uncertain what would happen next, I sent a text message to my wife. "I love you and the babies. Please hug them for me," he recounted. I imagine many of you sent a similar message. Wonder if he sent one to Fang Fang as well. No mention of that here, but I digress. It should come as a comfort to his colleagues that in what he believed to have been his last moments, he wanted to share his love with his wife of nearly 5 years, Brittany, and his children. No mention, however, of the woman with whom he's been having an alleged affair with for nearly the past decade. U.S. counterintelligence officials have linked his alleged mistress, Christine Fang, to China's Ministry of State Security, which is Beijing's equivalent to the CIA. Swalwell was made a House manager shortly after those allegations came to light and pushed hard for the president's conviction, even as he faced potential censure as well. And of course, before becoming the first non-voting member of the House to become an impeachment manager, Delegate Stacey Plaskett fought hard for recognition for the U.S. Virgin Islands. During her time in office, however, she struggled to bring attention to the island nation of just over 100,000. And what the heck is going on with her profile pic there? Got a little fist up plus a mask on? Alright, well, whatever. Governor GovTrack reported her in the top 10 most absent representatives during the 116th Congress. She introduced 23 bills, putting her in the lower third of House Dems, and only one of those bills made it through committee, but Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi never brought it to a vote. Meanwhile, Plaskett spent her portion of the prosecution's 16 hours making as much noise as she could. By the time Trump, called the cavalry of his thousands of supporters on January 6th, he made sure that those violent people would literally march right here to our steps from the ellipse, the huge park south of the White House, to the Capitol, she asserted. There is no evidence to suggest that President Trump coordinated with city officials to create some sort of route for protesters to go from the White House to the U.S. Capitol. Furthermore, it was, in fact, Pierre L'Enfant, the architect of Washington, D.C., around 200 years prior to the event of January 6, who designed the city to ensure that all roads led to the beacon of democracy he placed at the center of the city, Capitol Hill. To paraphrase from the rest of Federalist 65, as a House manager's arguments have not been the most cunning. It's lucky for them Democrats are the most numerous because they don't even need to feign neutrality. So there you have that. All right, well, continuing along that vein, We also get this bit of stuff out of Gateway Pundit. Democrats start off Thursday impeachment hearing presenting photos of noted Trump hater and Yang supporter Baked Alaska as Trump supporter. And of course, I've yet to see an article come through, although I've seen a lot of noise on social media about the fact that a lot of the video footage that provided the Dems for their quote-unquote evidence was shot by none other than some Antifa folks, or BLM, I forget which. Nonetheless, doesn't really matter. The bottom line is they provided their own folks to provide the footage to them. President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial resumed in the U.S. Senate on Thursday. Democrats are using their time to smear all Trump supporters as terrorists. It's as if Black Lives Matter and Antifa never existed. And Democrats are using video from Antifa operatives inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. But, whatever. On Thursday, Democrats proudly displayed photos of activist Baked Alaska inside Pelosi's office on January 6th. There we see this. Meet Baked Alaska. Despite having COVID, he stormed the U.S. Capitol. Let's call Trump. He'll be happy. We're fighting for Trump. Then continues, we need to get our boy Donald J. Trump into office. So Tim Giannett, better known online as Baked Alaska and a former BuzzFeed employee, was arrested in January for illegally entering the U.S. Capitol building on January 6th. And the fact that he worked for BuzzFeed alone should be enough to tell you all you need. So, again, I digress. Baked Alaska was charged by the FBI for knowingly entering or remaining in any restricted building or grounds without lawful authority and violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds, according to criminal complaint obtained by The Scoop. The former BuzzFeed creator live-streamed himself inside the Capitol on DLive, a popular streaming platform, which, by the way, if you try and go to his channel now, unfortunately you'll see that it has been canned. But nonetheless, although BuzzFeed is aggressively trying to distance itself from their past connection to Baked Alaska by labeling him a far-right troll and a right-wing extremist, Baked Alaska endorsed far-left Democrat Andrew Yang for president in 2019 and even filmed a rap music video for a song called Yang Gang Anthem that he made about Andrew Yang. This is who Democrats are using to represent a Trump voter at the sham impeachment trial today, meaning yesterday. And yes, there we see the BS meter right there on screen, and that's exactly what it is. A bunch of BS. So nonetheless, carrying on, Fox News had this. Lead impeachment manager Raskin reveals questions he would have asked Trump if he testified. And of course, why would he? The whole thing is a sham, it's a scam, unconstitutional at the onset, don't even have a Supreme Court justice presiding. Please. Raskin posed the questions to Trump's attorneys instead. Says former President Donald Trump will not testify in his own defense during his Senate impeachment trial, but lead House impeachment manager Rep. Jamie Raskin revealed what he would have asked Trump if he had chosen to appear. Raskin instead asked the questions of Trump's attorneys as the House concluded presenting its case Thursday afternoon. Donald Trump last week turned down our invitation to come testify about his actions, and therefore we've not been able to ask him any questions directly as of this point. Therefore, during the course of their 16-hour allotted presentation, we would pose these preliminary questions to his lawyers, which I think are on everyone's minds right now, and which we would have asked Mr. Trump himself if he had chosen to come and testify about his actions and inactions when we invited him last week. Raskin then posed 4 questions aimed at Trump's mindset during and after the riot. Why did President Trump not tell his supporters to stop the attack on the Capitol as soon as he learned of it? Why did President Trump do nothing to stop the attack for at least 2 hours after the attack began? As our constitutional commander-in-chief, why did he do nothing to send help to our overwhelmed and besieged law enforcement officers for at least 2 hours after the attack began? On January 6th, why did President Trump not at any point that day condemn the violent insurrection and the insurrectionists? Trump did post a video message on January 6 calling for the rioters to go home. But rather than condemn their behavior, he sympathized with their sentiment behind it, telling them, "We have to have peace, so go home. We love you. You're very special." The following day, Trump posted another video in which he condemned the violence as a heinous attack, said he was outraged by it, and stated that the rioters defiled the seat of American democracy. He also said that those who broke the law will pay. If a president will invite a violent insurrection against our government, as of course we allege and think we've proven in this case, but just in general, if a president incited a violent insurrection against our government, would that be a high crime and misdemeanor? He asked. Can we all agree at least on that? Trump's legal team will have an opportunity to respond to those questions, if they so choose, and present their arguments in the former president's defense on Friday, today. Trump attorney Bruce Castor has told Fox News that he intends to make a First Amendment argument and that the defense will be spending a great deal of time on what it is that the president said and the context in which he said it. The House managers on Thursday claimed that Trump's words were not protected by the First Amendment because of their insightful nature, calling this argument a completely irrelevant distraction. Castor also said that Trump's team will argue that Trump did not receive due process during this impeachment. Due process requires an investigation. There was none, and we'll point that out, Castor said. Can you imagine if the police were allowed to arrest somebody because we think he did it, and then do their investigation? Of course not. So again, we shall see how this plays out. I sincerely hope that Castor and company have a strategy in mind and do not kowtow to these folks. Do not go and pander to them. Do not go into these institutions and revere how great they are and everything else. Get in there, hit them in the face multiple times, keep hitting, don't stop until you're done, and get out. My humble opinion, of course. Nonetheless, right scoop, Alan Dershowitz calls out Democrat Jamie Raskin for specific hypocrisy during phony impeachment. So we get this yesterday, says Alan Dershowitz called out his former student, Democrat Jamie Raskin, for his duplicitous use of the First Amendment that protected his own father. Here we get a tweet out of Logan Ratic, says, new. Alan Dersh calls out the hypocrisy of his former Harvard law student, lead House impeachment manager Rep. Raskin, during an interview with Heather Childers and Bob Sellers TV on Newsmax. So we'll let a little of this play through.
And then Jamie Raskin's father, Marcus Raskin, was part of the Pentagon Papers case. He was the one who took the Pentagon Papers from Ellsberg, who stole them, gave them to the New York Times. He was saved from a felony prosecution by the very First Amendment that Jamie Raskin is now trashing and saying doesn't have any application. You can't say First Amendment for me and my father and not for President Trump. The First Amendment applies to all or to none. There's no distinction. Yeah. And then Jamie Raskin's father, Mark.
So there you have it. In his words, I won't repeat the next paragraph because that's exactly what he said. But nonetheless, he says you can't say the First Amendment for me and my father and not for President Trump. The First Amendment to all or to none. There is no distinction. And that's the very thing that the Dems are trying to do here. They're trying to cherry pick where they want to apply what, and just like the whole stinking impeachment case. The Constitution matters not to the Dems, only when it's convenient for their purposes. Do the ends justify the means? Well, if the Constitution is in the way of that, well, then we discard it, and if it plays into their hand, then yes, we will use it. A lovely point made by Dershowitz, which is just one more reason, I lost count how many, we know that this impeachment trial is absolute garbage. It's exactly what Hawley said it was this morning, a personal, political vendetta, and nothing more. So there we have it, in the words of old Dershowitz. All right, well, another interesting article came through out of Powerline yesterday. It says impeachment managers appeal to senators' emotions and not their reason. And that's been the whole premise of this at the end of the day. The quote-unquote evidence that they provided, the cut-ups, the cherry-picking, the going back through tweets, all meant to invoke emotions, an emotional response, but totally void of reason, logic, and facts. And that's been the case all along. In making its case to the Senate, the House impeachment managers are focusing on the Capitol riot itself rather than on Donald Trump's responsibility, if any, for it. Yesterday, senators watched video of a mob going after Mike Pence, Nancy Pelosi, and others, injuring police officers in the process. The video seems to have made an impression on Republican senators, most of whom, I'm sure, were already disgusted by what happened at the Capitol. If the House managers could show that Trump is culpable for the rioting, that he advocated or desired it, they could probably win additional Republicans over. Perhaps they could even approach the two-thirds majority required for conviction. But showing video of the rioting won't accomplish this, nor is it likely to sway many Americans. The public, I believe, has moved past the rioting, even if, understandably, those who experienced it directly have not. Where is the evidence that Trump advocated or desired the rioting that took place? It's not in the House impeachment article. That document focuses solely on Trump's claims that he won the election and won it in a landslide, claims he had an absolute right in a free country to voice, and his statement that Americans need to fight like hell to keep their country. Is there a member of the Senate who has not urged supporters to quote-unquote fight vigorously for a cause or on his or her behalf? I doubt it. The impeachment article relies on the context of Trump's statement about fighting. The reliance is understandable, given the weak or non-existent support Trump's actual statement provides. But when scrutinized, the context further weakens the House manager's argument. Charles Kessler demonstrates this in an excellent article about impeachment and the future of Trumpism. Kessler focuses on the full speech delivered on the fateful day, and he writes, says, if Trump's speech has a political target, it's the weak Republicans, who acquiesce in election fraud and will not fight in the trenches alongside him. The Liz Cheneys of the world, as he calls them. We've got to get rid of them, he says. He specifies how that should be done. We have to primary the hell out of the ones that don't fight. You primary them. Later, he adds, and a year from now you're going to start working on Congress, and we've got to get rid of the weak Congress people, the ones that aren't any good. A year from now means as the 2022 election cycle gears up. His incitement, so to speak, is to oppose the weak Republicans by challenging them in the normal process of American primary elections. In the meantime, he calls on the audience to walk down to the Capitol in order to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back your country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong, he adds. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. It isn't sedition to peacefully and patriotically protest, to cheer on brave legislators and boo, or in some cases, buck up with the pride and boldness, the weak ones. And what if, as Trump hints is likely, the protesters are ignored, and Biden receives a majority of the electoral votes and becomes president? What then? We're going to see whether or not we have great and courageous leaders, or whether or not we have leaders that should be ashamed of themselves throughout history, throughout eternity. The penalty he points to is eventual public and private obloquy. If they do the wrong thing, we should never ever forget that they did. Never forget. We should never ever forget. Despite his constant, characteristic, and exaggerated appeals to strength versus weakness, his ultimate appeal is not so much to might, but to a form of right, based not merely in history, but in eternity. To know you have acted shamefully is the worst penalty, he advises, or ought to be, which is where public opinion, and the possibility of later electoral defeat, comes to bear as an external sanction against the otherwise shameless. This glimpse suggests how far Trump's speech is from being a call to substitute might for right by inciting his partisans to riot. In fact, the chief business of the speech is a long, informative rehearsal of the facts behind the fraud he alleges took place in 7 states. Though it has humorous moments, the statement is pretty dry, and he even apologizes for that. He wraps it up by calling for a series of changes in election laws to require voter ID and to prohibit ballot harvesting, unsecured drop boxes, universal unsolicited mail-in balloting, and the like. It surely didn't sound like a rallying cry to trash the Capitol. The House's article of impeachment quotes from the conclusion of this long section and of the address. And we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. But the context proves that the fight Trump was calling for was political and legal, not criminal. Rather than seeking to obstruct the democratic process, he was urging his followers to use it to the fullest extent of the law. In my judgment, there isn't a word of incitement of insurrection in the speech. And the article continues, says, I agree. Some of the things Trump said in earlier days can be construed as incitement, but the focus should be on Trump's speech the day of. That's the definitive version of what Trump was calling for and wanted. As Kessler says, there is nothing in the speech that can reasonably be construed as inciting an insurrection. And of course, you've heard me talk about this as well. The fact that at the end of the day, the timeline certainly does not match up. And of course, I sincerely hope that the casters, the Shones and company bring that up here as part of their defense as well. And the very fact that the evidence now coming through, especially from the Capitol Hill police, states that they had insight that the plans were in place long before Trump ever made the speech. So they had intelligence indicating that something was coming up, right? So again, we shall see how this plays out. All right, Democrats' impeachment lead admits using National Guard to compel Trump into election concession. And of course, if you listened to old Teddy Boy Lou yesterday, you would have heard this. So this out of the National Pulse yesterday. Ted Lieu said the quiet part out loud and perhaps has done more damage to the entire Democratic Party case to impeach President Trump than any other of his fellow impeachment managers. Speaking on the floor of the Senate today, Lieu shockingly admitted, Trump does not say that one sentence that matters. He does not say the one sentence that would stop future political violence. The election was not stolen. He still has not said that sentence. That is why National Guard troops in full-body armor still patrol outside. Ooh. This is a leading Democrat impeachment manager admitting to the fact that the National Guard has been utilized for political ends, with a view to forcing someone to make a political statement, with a view to erasing someone's opinion.
He needed to unequivocally condemn the attack, but he also needed to mean those words. You saw Donald Trump tweet endless attacks, sometimes 108 tweets in a day, and in public speeches and across rallies, repeating words of fight and stop the steal and never surrender. You know what it looks like when President Trump wants to convey a message. Forcefully, loudly, and repeatedly, he does that. This video sent after a week of the attack was not that. And we know this because in this video, he again does not show remorse, does not take responsibility. He again does not acknowledge his role in the insurrection. He does not say in that video, for example, everything I said in the months prior went too far. And he does not say the one sentence that matters. He does not say the one sentence that would stop future political violence. The election was not stolen. He still hasn't said that sentence. That is why National Guard troops in full body armor still patrol outside.
And there you have it in his own words. Yes, that was the ultimate means as to why the National Guard is currently in D.C. Because it's for political ends. Very interesting. So, what's that say about why the need is still there all the way up to and through the middle part of March? We'll have to see. All right, well, not to be outdone, then we get this piece out of National Pulse as well. It says, powerful video, Dem impeachment managers implicate themselves in violent insurrectionism. Interesting. One of the most powerful videos you'll see surrounding this impeachment cycle is a spliced up, or doctored, meme of Democrat impeachment managers claiming Donald J. Trump incited an insurrection. Instead of showing the clips Democrats used in the Senate, however, the meme splices in proof of Democrats doing precisely what they accused President Trump of doing. Don't we call that projection? Exactly, doing the very same thing that they are accusing their opponent of. The mashup made by Ace 64 Films reveals years of violent rhetoric, election denialism, and the stoking of political tensions by the very same Dems now seeking to impeach Trump for inciting an insurrection. So we'll let this play through.
Donald Trump committed a massive crime against our Constitution and our people, and the worst violation of the presidential oath of office in the history of the United States of America.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
By telling the mob that their election had been stolen from them.
I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified.
Even then, after that vicious attack, he continued to spread the big lie.
I think it's also critical to understand you can run the best campaign and you can have the election stolen from you.
This was months of cultivating a base of people who were violent. Praising that violence.
And everyone beware. They're not going to let up, and they should not.
And he still gave that marching orders and, quote, fight like hell.
Democrats are going to fight like hell.
We're going to fight like hell.
We'll fight like hell. We'll fight like hell.
But can you imagine telling your supporters that the only way you could possibly lose is if an American election was rigged and stolen from you?
And you can have the election stolen from you.
And ask yourself whether you've ever seen anyone at any level of government make the same claim about their own election.
And you can have the election stolen from you.
And in the months the president made these statements, people listened. Armed supporters surrounded election officials' homes. The Secretary of State for Georgia got death threats.
And they were shouting threats, to us to kill us. We cannot go outside now. It's become so dangerous for us.
When he saw firsthand the violence that his conduct was creating,
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country. Maybe there will be.
He didn't condemn the violence, incited it further.
They're not going to let up, and they should not.
So there you have it. Little 2-minute, 20-second or so clip, and that nice little cut up by Ace 64 Productions, whatever it was there. Ace 64 Films, there we go. Credit to them. I sincerely hope that the managers or the defense team for Trumpanet uses something similar, probably a lot more. If they want to try and pull at the old heartstrings of America, then, well, I'm sure there's plenty of evidence that we can certainly use from Portland, from Kenosha, and many of the cities after the George Floyd attacks around the country last year by the minion soldiers, the foot soldiers of the Dem Party, which they own at the end of the day. Those are their folks, their justified means to their ends. So I can only hope that Schoen, Castor, Vanderveen, those folks do a good job of putting that forward here and stick it right to them, because that's exactly what needs to happen. No more pussyfooting around. Get the job done. And if you want to go so far as anything else, I would venture to say, do you really want to put them in a box? Let's find out exactly what was on Nancy Pelosi's laptop. What does she know? When did she know it? Let's see if we can get some evidence from phone conversations. Off government phones, burner phones, or otherwise. Let's introduce that as some evidence. How about that? Let's see who really orchestrated this event. And I think we already know the answer to that. All right, well, that is going to do it for this edition of Midnight Rider. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Just a little bit of a recap on day 3, obviously day 4 coming up here. Stay tuned. We may do a little broadcasting on that here a little bit later on. Not sure. If we do, it'll be over on the 5x5 network, so check that out. Otherwise, I'll be back with a wrap-up probably tomorrow to wrap things up on today's events, and we'll see you back then. Take care. God bless everybody.